Henry Fonda, an emblem of integrity on Hollywood's silver screen, crafted a monumental cinematic legacy, yet his life closed in profound sorrow. The tragic loss of his second wife, Frances Seymour, in 1950 under heartbreaking circumstances left an indelible scar, haunting him until his final days. Step into the story of a legend where stardom was overshadowed by inconsolable grief. The legendary actor Henry Fonda's death raises questions that lead us back to a shocking family tragedy. Henry Fonda married 5 times during his life, but his marriage to Frances Ford Seymour ended with the most tragic outcome. The story of Henry Fonda's death and Frances Ford Seymour's cause of death reveals a family's struggle with secrets, silence, and unresolved grief. Frances Fonda dies by suicide at Craig House. The public was shocked by Frances Seymour Fonda's tragic death in 1950. She took her own life at Craig House Sanitarium in Beacon, New York on April 14, 1950. This devastating event happened about 3.5 months after Henry Fonda asked her for a divorce. The details of Frances' death were deeply disturbing. Staff couldn't save her life by the time they found her. The New York Times reported she died shortly after they found her with the self-inflicted wound. Craig House was a facility where Frances received treatment for her mental health struggles. The note Frances left behind was heartbreaking. Her final written words simply stated, "Sorry, but this is the best way out." This brief message showed her deep despair. She addressed the note to her doctors at the facility, which suggests she thought carefully about her actions. Mystery still surrounds the circumstances of the note. Craig House staff found it next to Frances' body, though different sources report slight variations in its exact contents. The core message stayed the same: Frances saw no other way to escape her suffering. Frances Seymour Fonda was just 42 years old when she died. Some reports say she took her life on her birthday. Her death left behind 2 young children, Jane, who was 12 years old, and Peter, who was 10 at the time. Frances was laid to rest at Ogdensburg Cemetery in Ogdensburg, New York. Henry Fonda's controversial decisions about handling the aftermath of her suicide created more family trauma later. Newspapers across the country painted a stark picture of Frances' death. They described her as the 42-year-old wife of Henry Fonda and a socialite heiress. These reports caused additional family trauma, especially for her son Peter, who later learned the truth about his mother's death from a newspaper article he found by chance. Frances' mental health got substantially worse in the months before her suicide. Her marriage to Henry had been strained for some time. These pressures, along with Henry's request for divorce, seemed to push her fragile state of mind over the edge. The Craig House tragedy started a long period of silence and secrecy in the Fonda family. Henry told his children their mother died of a heart attack instead of acknowledging the suicide. This lie, though meant to protect the children, created deeper wounds that took decades to heal. Frances Ford Seymour went from being a Canadian-born socialite who married rising actor Henry Fonda to dying alone in a sanitarium far from Hollywood's glamour. Her death cast a dark shadow over the Fonda family, creating waves of trauma that affected Henry, Jane, and Peter throughout their lives. Henry Fonda plans divorce before Frances' death. The marriage between Henry Fonda and Frances Seymour Brokaw started falling apart months before her tragic death. Their 13-year relationship that brought 2 children into the world was coming to an end as 1949 drew to a close. Henry Fonda delivered crushing news to his wife Frances in August 1949. He wanted a divorce. He later admitted their marriage hadn't brought him happiness. Reports showed that Fonda had plans to marry Susan Blanchard, the actress stepdaughter of noted songwriter and theatrical producer Oscar Hammerstein. Frances, who had battled emotional problems for years, felt devastated by this news. She couldn't handle the revelation that her husband not only wanted to end their marriage, but had found someone else. The thought of an uncertain future weighed heavily on her mind as she dealt with her mental health struggles after 13 years of marriage. One account paints a harsh picture. In 1949, after 13 miserable years and 2 children together, Fonda approached Brokaw and told her he wanted a divorce. Never one for empathy, he then dug the knife in more. He admitted to her that he wanted to split because he wanted to be free to marry his mistress Susan. These words left Frances shattered. Frances' mental health deteriorated faster after Fonda's confession about wanting a divorce. She checked into Craig House Sanitarium in Beacon, New York, by January 1950. This private psychiatric facility specialized in addiction treatment and had helped other notable patients. Frances tried to process her pain and devastation at Craig House. Her husband's infidelity and the end of her marriage caused such distress that she needed professional psychiatric help. The treatment at Craig House proved insufficient to heal her emotional wounds. Frances wrote a heartbreaking letter to Henry from the sanitarium. "Whenever you are ready to make the change, I will be ready to go. I am awfully homesick in spite of the beauties of this place." Her words showed she still felt attached to Fonda despite their pending divorce. Frances faced growing isolation and despair between entering Craig House in January and her suicide in April. People talked about her stay at the institution, noting she suffered from unshakable fits of depression. All the same, few people predicted the tragic events that would unfold about 3.5 months after Fonda asked for the divorce. Henry Fonda moved quickly to arrange a private funeral service after Frances' suicide on April 14, 1950. He decided that only he and Frances' mother, Sophie Seymour, would attend. Jane and Peter Fonda, just 12 and 10 years old, couldn't say goodbye to their mother at her funeral. The Poughkeepsie Journal reported, Fonda and Mrs. Fonda's mother attended private funeral services at Beacon yesterday afternoon. This small ceremony, held without the children, became another source of pain for the young Fondas. Fonda's decision to keep Jane and Peter from the funeral matched how he handled Frances' death overall. He told them a heart attack took their mother rather than revealing her suicide. One account states, likely afraid of any unnecessary outpourings of emotion, Fonda didn't even let his own children go to their mother's funeral, instead putting on a hasty affair with just himself and his mother-in-law in attendance. Playwright Joshua Logan, Fonda's friend, remembered that the actor performed in Mr. Roberts on stage the night of Frances' death, supposedly to keep from going crazy. His choice to continue working rather than grieve with his children shows how he dealt with the tragedy. Frances' final act of defiance came through her will, which pointedly has the children and excludes Henry. This detail hints at her deep feelings about their marriage's end and perhaps her last effort to take care of her children. Children are misled about their mother's death. Jane and Peter Fonda became unwitting victims of a life-changing lie that would haunt them for decades after. Their father, Henry Fonda, made a decision the day after Frances' death that completely changed how his children understood their family history. Henry Fonda gathered his children the morning after Frances died to deliver devastating news, but he didn't tell them the truth. Instead of explaining, he made up a story. He told them Frances had died from a heart attack at the hospital. This lie, though likely meant to protect them from trauma, ended up causing deeper scars. Jane Fonda wrote in her autobiography, "My father told me she'd had a heart attack and died." Peter got the same false story. Neither child got a chance to understand what really happened to their mother. The lie went beyond just hiding how she died. Henry also kept from his children that Frances had been getting treatment at Craig House Sanitarium. He painted a picture that erased their mother's mental health struggles and made her death seem like a sudden medical event rather than the end result of emotional pain. Henry Fonda didn't just hide the truth, he also stopped his children from properly mourning their mother. He arranged a private funeral service with just himself and Frances' mother. The children couldn't attend and didn't even get a memorial service to help them deal with their grief. Jane and Peter had no way to find closure without any remembrance ritual. Most children who lose a parent get to say goodbye, leave flowers, or take part in some ceremony to acknowledge their loss. The Fonda children got none of this, which left them confused and emotionally hurt. Henry Fonda went back to work right away and performed on stage the very night Frances died. His quick return to normal life downplayed how important Frances' death was and showed his children to suppress their emotions rather than grieve normally. The most damaging part came from Frances being completely erased from family life. After telling the children about her death, Henry Fonda made it clear nobody would ever mention Frances again. Her name became forbidden, her photos vanished, and family conversations acted like she never existed. After she died, it was as if she had never lived, Jane Fonda said later. Her belongings were removed, she was never spoken of again, it was as if she had never existed. This forced silence taught the children to push down their questions, memories, and grief. This approach left deep psychological scars. The children had to keep their pain inside since they couldn't talk about their mother. Peter later described it as feeling like there was a 600-pound canary lying dead on the dining room table and nobody was allowed to talk about it. Henry Fonda married Susan Blanchard within a year of Francis' death, which further erased Francis from family memory. The children had to adapt to this new reality without processing their loss. The silence spread beyond just their home. Their schools got instructions not to discuss Francis, and family friends followed Henry's lead by never saying her name. This big cover-up of silence left Jane and Peter alone with their grief, unable to understand a loss that made no sense to them. This pattern of lies and silence would affect both children's lives for years. It created wounds that took decades to heal and shaped their relationships, careers, and personal growth along the way. Peter Fonda discovers the truth a decade later. Peter Fonda's understanding of his family changed forever after he uncovered the web of lies about his mother Francis's death, a decade after she passed away. Peter Fonda learned the heartbreaking truth about his mother's suicide in 1955, 10 years after her death. He spent that summer working as an apprentice at a summer stock theater in Fishkill, New York. The truth emerged unexpectedly through a local diner owner who had become familiar with Peter. The owner approached him with a yellowed newspaper clipping. Peter later remembered the moment. He sat down next to me at the bar. He pulled out his wallet and removed a yellowed newspaper clipping. The photograph caught Peter's eye immediately, the same one from his birth announcement in the New York Times. The text beneath told a story that shattered everything he knew. Frances Seymour Fonda, wife of the actor Henry Fonda, committed suicide yesterday at the Craig House, a posh asylum in Beacon, New York. Different sources tell varying accounts of how Peter learned the truth. One suggests he heard Jane, his sister, discussing it 5 years after their mother died. Another mentions a Cosmopolitan article from 1962. The core elements of shock and betrayal remain consistent throughout each version. The revelation left Peter completely stunned. He recalled that he sat there for 2 or 3 minutes, speechless as the truth sank in. The hardest part wasn't just learning about his mother's death, it was realizing that everyone else knew everything, but not me. This deception scarred Peter deeply, affecting him throughout his teenage years and adult life. The betrayal extended beyond his father to an entire community that managed to keep this secret. Henry Fonda had created a story about heart failure, supposedly to shield his children. Peter believed this for a decade. The lie only delayed the inevitable trauma while adding layers of betrayal. Peter was already 20 years old at the time he found out this fundamental truth about his family's past. He had lived half his life believing a carefully crafted story. Peter found solace in his work, particularly acting. His film career became his focus as he appeared in various movies including Tammy and the Doctor, The Victors, Uli's Gold, The Hired Hand, The Trip, and 1966 Wild Angels with Nancy Sinatra and Bruce Dern. Acting became his therapy, a way to channel his complex emotions into performances. Medical professionals later diagnosed Peter with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, a condition he had struggled with since childhood. Parky Fonda, Peter's wife, shared that his untreated PTSD caused nightmares and symptoms he couldn't understand for years. The trauma stemmed from multiple sources: his mother's suicide, the subsequent deception, and other childhood incidents. These included a near-fatal accident on his 11th birthday when he accidentally shot himself in the stomach. Peter later used his personal trauma experience in his acting. When offered a role playing someone with PTSD, he simply said, "This is it. I get this." His wife noted, Peter had his own war going on his head and heart all the time because of all the things he went through, but he was still a very gentle, peaceful person and had a quiet acceptance of it. Jane Fonda uncovers deeper truths. Jane Fonda took a different path than her brother Peter, who stumbled upon the truth by accident. She started a thoughtful journey to understand her mother's life and death decades after the tragedy. Her search ended up revealing truths more painful, yet healing, than she had predicted. Jane Fonda made a significant decision that brought clarity to her childhood trauma while writing her 2005 memoir, My Life So Far. She dedicated her memoir to her mother and realized this commitment would push her to break down who Frances had been. The decision led her to get her mother's medical records from Craig House, where Frances had taken her life. "I got the records from the institution where my mother killed herself. It was a big packet. I remember when it arrived, I started to shake. I got in bed, I was so cold. I started reading it, Jane recalled. These records held detailed reports from medical staff with typed pages and handwritten notes in the margins that proved eye-opening. Jane found that her mother had suffered from bipolar disorder, a condition the public knew nothing about in 1950. She could now piece together the puzzle of her mother's erratic behavior, constant illnesses, and suicide as an adult. Jane uncovered an even more devastating secret about her mother's past while reviewing these institutional records. Jane could finally understand her mother's 4-decade struggle after reviewing Frances' writings and her doctor's reports. "The minute that I read that, everything fell into place," Jane explained. This vital information explained her mother's puzzling behaviors, constant illnesses, excessive plastic surgeries, feelings of worthlessness, body hatred, and eventual suicide at age 42. Jane shared this discovery at a benefit for the Rape Treatment Center in 2014, highlighting how sexual violence had shaped her family's history through generations. Something remarkable happened as Jane processed these revelations. She found herself able to forgive both her mother and herself. "I wanted to take her in my arms and tell her how sorry I was, that I understood why it had been the way it was," Jane said of her mother. Jane had internalized her mother's absence and suicide as her fault during childhood. "As a child, you always think it was your fault, because the child can't blame the adult because they depend on the adult for survival. It takes a long time to get over the guilt," Jane explained. These discoveries led Jane to a profound realization. "It wasn't that I wasn't lovable, they had issues," she concluded. This understanding helped her feel tremendous empathy for her parents and finally forgive herself. Jane sees her mother's story through compassionate eyes now, noting that Frances might have found healing had she lived 20 years later when specific therapies for trauma survivors became accessible. "I sometimes cry when I think of how my mother could have been saved," Jane wrote poignantly. Henry Fonda projected warmth and compassion on screen, yet he managed to keep an emotional barrier between himself and his children. Neither time nor tragedy seemed to break through this wall. His son and daughter spent decades trying to understand their father, who remained a stranger despite raising them. Peter and Jane Fonda spent their lives dealing with their father's emotional unavailability. Jane saw Henry as a very shy, withdrawn person who used acting as a mask to express emotions he couldn't in real life. Peter painted an equally bleak picture, calling his father starchy compared to the archetypal decent man audiences knew from his films. People often called Henry a cold fish in his personal relationships, despite his on-screen warmth. Dinner time became especially anxiety-filled. "Jane and I didn't look forward to having dinner with him," Peter shared. "It's just that he was quiet and didn't talk much, and we felt he was judging us, and we didn't do much that was right. The dinner table was a scary place." Their relationship changed dramatically after working together. Peter's 1998 memoir *Don't Tell Dad* describes a touching afternoon that ended with Henry crying as he left. Slowly and choking on the high-powered emotion, he said, "I love you very much, son. I want you to know that." This moment changed everything for Peter. "I hugged him so hard I could feel the pacemaker in his chest. Tears streaming down my own cheeks, I told him I loved him very much," Peter wrote. Neither father nor son had expressed such feelings before. Peter added that years of frustration fell off my heart like melting snow sliding off a roof. Their newly settled relationship lasted briefly. Henry Fonda's health failed in 1982 due to heart disease. Peter rushed to his father's bedside at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center during his final hospitalization. Henry broke through his emotional walls one last time. Looking at Peter with both of his beautiful blue eyes, he spoke his final words. "I love you so very much, son. I want you to know that." Henry Fonda died on August 12, 1982, surrounded by his wife Shirley, daughter Jane, and son Peter. These last moments of connection helped heal years of emotional distance. They brought a bittersweet end to their complex father-son relationship.